Hello. One of the comments under a video I recently made informed me that people are not going to be allowed to own private cars in future. And this applied as much in Britain as in America. So there are ideas afoot going on all over the Western world. So I do remember that I did see a passing comment by a minister, the Transport Minister to be precise, Trudy Harrison, in which she spoke about that. Now, I suppose that should have rung a couple of warning bells. It didn't, it just passed me. It sounded to me like one of those trial balloons. But of course, a trial balloon is a trial balloon. It means somebody's actually blown it up and set it off. And I found some articles about it, and this is one of them. It's in an Indian news organ called TBS News, and it says as follows. Transport Minister of the United Kingdom, Trudy Harrison, recently stressed the necessity to ditch the 20th century thinking centred around private vehicle ownership and towards greater flexibility with personal choice and low carbon shared transport. You know, I'm so sorry. I mean, if this had been the shadow minister of transport, I would have understood it. But this is a Conservative minister, and I just want to pick apart what she said there. Okay, ditch the 20th century thinking. So what she's saying there is it's old-fashioned. Around private vehicle ownership, that's a sort of category now, isn't it? It's not like owning your own car, which she could have said. She said private vehicle ownership, which sort of distances it. And towards greater flexibility. How much more flexible can it be if you have your own car? You can take off and drive anywhere. That's what I'd call flexible. How much more what greater flexibility could there be than that? With personal choice. Yeah, my personal choice is to get into my car and drive to the supermarket. I don't have to book a journey with any agency over a shared vehicle. Yeah, the dog can hear I'm getting a bit agitated, I think. And low carbon. And there it is. She's using the low carbon, charm words, the spell, the benediction, whatever. And when you say that, low carbon, that answers everything. And whatever trouble you have to go through to get transport, this is greater flexibility and personal choice. Yeah. Okay, let's see what the next thing. Harrison asserted that all of these should reduce carbon emissions into UK's atmosphere. However, the choices do not come without costs, particularly for those living in rural areas. Who cares about people living in rural areas? The only important people live in places like Islington, don't they? Or central London. It says here, 300 residents in Coventry. In Coventry of England? Well, it is an Indian paper. I mean, they're doing pretty well anyway. So, recently showed interest in giving up their personal cars. Well, the people of Coventry, 300. Do you know how big Coventry is? Oh, I don't either. But it's a big city. The government trade-off is a mobility credit worth up to £3,000. This mobility credit programme has reportedly been going on since March of this year, with 73 cars turned in and crushed. I've not heard of that. So that was TBS News. Now we've got this, which is from a group called Motorious, and it describes itself as a team of collectors, restorers, industry experts, and the all-around car obsessed. So this is what they have to say. Soon Brits will own nothing and be happy for it. Where have we heard that before? UK Government Transport Minister Trudy Harrison recently spoke at a mobility conference addressing the future of personal mobility. In her comments, she said it was necessary to ditch the 20th century thinking centred around private vehicle ownership and towards greater flexibility. We've been there before. Harrison went on to praise not only public transportation, but also bike share services, e-scooters and ride-sharing platforms. All of these are supposed to tune down how much carbon the UK is emitting into the atmosphere. As with all choices, this comes at a cost, particularly for those living in rural areas. That's what Motorious says. Understandably, many Brits are upset about this. Some have asked if they should start riding their horse instead. Well, I have to admit, when I read that, that occurred to me too. All in the name of progress. Others, you see, it's not progress. The thing that literally drove the progress in the modern era was, one of the things was the motor car. And because it enabled people to get from A to B more quickly and relatively cheaply. And that meant there was more mobility, more contact, and just generally society was moving quicker because of it. Others are tying this statement by Harrison with the looming government ban of internal combustion engines for cars by 2030. They're trying to legislate for electric cars, you know, over here. After all, EVs aren't exactly cheap, so what better way to force people onto public transportation than by pricing them out of the vehicle market? Look, what's happening is a class thing. What's happening is this: the rich people will be able to afford their public transport and the poor won't. This happened in Britain. Here's a nice photograph of traffic in Oxford Street in 1965. That was as full as Oxford Street got because most people had to use the underground or the buses. And only fairly rich people could afford cars, or fairly well-off people could afford cars in 1965. And this is how it's going back to that. Personal transport will be for the rich, and the poor just have to book or use their apps on their phones to book use of a publicly owned vehicle, which may or may not be of reasonable standard, and it's something you can't leave your stuff in. I know I often have a lot of my riding stuff in the car, and if I had to share a car, I'd be hauling it in and out of the vehicle all the time. It's all right for me. I live in a house. I can just take it from the drive to the front door, but there are other people who live in flats who would be constantly heaving stuff up and down stairs or in cramped lifts all the time. Now, of course, The Guardian is the one paper that would welcome this, and this is quite an old post, I think. Yeah, this is 2017, but I shouldn't think The Guardian's changed that much in its opinions. Owning a car will soon be a thing of the past, said John Harris. You see, what's going on here is no less than a change in the way society works, and the idea of changing all engines for battery-driven engines, again, that's a top-down change. Now, when the motor car came, nobody legislated for its specifications. What happened was the most efficient I mean, there were electric cars to begin with, and there were other sorts as well, steam-driven ones, all sorts. But the one that won out was the one that worked best, and nobody legislated for that. One of the problems with communism, communism's a nice idea in many ways. The trouble is it's all top down, and the problem with that is that the top doesn't know what the bottom is doing quite often, or doesn't know literally what the situation is on the ground because they're the top. So communism was an attempt to leapfrog development by artificial means. They wanted Russia, it started with Russia, didn't it? They wanted Russia to forge ahead really quickly. And so they made rules that forced people to act in certain ways. And people didn't like that. And the result was, when it all fell apart, when the top couldn't control the bottom anymore, then Russia was in for many years of serious and horrible social disruption, of real poverty and upheaval. I saw Russians at the time. They were telling me what was going on. And even now, it's not in a good state. That is, the people who took over were very often criminals. And there's a lot of uncivilized types of government going on in Russia, which are not really much spoken about. Yes. Okay, so this is the Guardian comment. If ours is an age in which no end of institutions and conventions are being disrupted, it shouldn't come as a surprise that one of the most basic features of everyday life seems under serious threat. If you're fortunate enough to live in a house with a drive, look outside and you will probably see it. That four-wheeled metal box, oh yeah, put it down, do, which may well be equipped with every technological innovation imaginable. Oh, just a minute, I've lost it now. Oh yeah, but now shows distinct signs of obsolescence. No, it will be obsolete when it's obsolete. Any fiddling with the government will not, well, it won't endear the government to the voters, and it won't work. It simply won't work. To put it another way, after a century in which the car has sat at the heart of industrial civilization, the age of the automobile, of mass vehicle ownership, and the idea, in the Western world at least, that life is not complete without your own set of wheels, it looks to be drawing to a close. Top Gear is a dead duck. No, you're wrong. And I'm not going to just say you're wrong. I'm going to explain why, and we'll go back to communism. When people start telling the masses how they should be living their lives, it doesn't work. It obviously didn't work in Russia. It doesn't work in China. China is losing out to India now. Its booming economy has stalled, and India is going to be well ahead of it by next year, if all goes well. And all is going well because in India you still have the ability to say what you think, whereas in China you don't. And that's the difference. When a government starts telling you what to do, then it tells you what to do, and when you disagree, it then stops you talking. We're seeing that here in Britain. It's not helping us, and people like me in a small way, and other people in much bigger ways, are well, swimming against that tide, and I suspect we're going to win. It's going to take some work, but we are going to win. Oh, I've lost it again. Right. Deep social trends do point in another direction. In 1994, 48% of 17 to 12-year-olds and 75% of 21 to 29-year-olds had driving licenses. According to the National Travel Survey, by 2016, these figures had dropped respectively to 31% and 66%. Yes, there is somewhat less, especially as towns get more crowded and restrictions on driving are stronger. Yes, there will be a tendency for this to fall off, and that will be a natural tendency. What we're complaining about here, or rather what I'm complaining about here, what I'm warning about, is that if it's legislated to, then it will end up in a disaster. And as I said, not just in Britain, because I go back to Motorious again. If you think this plan is limited to just the UK, you haven't been paying attention. There have been other efforts to make private vehicle ownership a thing of the past. You see, because private vehicle ownership means freedom, and governments are, look, you know how they've seized on COVID as a means of restricting us. Well, they were already thinking of that. It was just COVID was a bit of a godsend to them, wasn't it? There have been other efforts to make private vehicle ownership a thing of the past, including a new measure in Southern California. Oh, wouldn't it always start in Southern California? The 2021 Regional Transportation Plan, passed recently by the San Diego Association of Governments Board of Directors, is a $160 billion initiative just for the metropolitan area to boost public transportation. That's a hefty price tag for such a small area, because when a government starts to fiddle with things, it never works out well. Governments waste money. It's a shame. I wish they didn't. I wish everything worked out well and fairly and with the least inefficiency, but frankly, it works out best when the governments aren't involved. What was that thing Reagan said? The seven most, I don't remember how many words it was, but the most terrifying words in the English language were, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.